Okay, so the next animation technique I'm going to show you guys is how to do an animated section cut. And so what we'll do is we'll create literally like a plane here that can pass through our object and produce a section as it moves through. And then we're going to also produce a what's called a double-sided material, so that when the section cut is taken, it actually looks like you get that, again, that kind of black poche effect. So it looks like a section cut. We'll start off with the Maya file from the previous tutorial. So these are our Boolean difference animations that I've got here. So again, what I'm going to do is before I edit or modify this file, I'm just going to do a quick file save as. Animated section, and then do a save as. I'm going to delete both cameras because, again, we're not totally sure where we want our cameras to end up. Now I'm going to kind of scrub through the animation, and I'm going to, again, kind of pick a moment that I think is sort of more interesting. So for this guy here, we'll do like, I think that one looks pretty good. So I'm going to take this, duplicate it, and move it out. And again, that duplication, that effect, kind of removes any animation that's occurring to it, so that object's kind of locked in. And then same with this one over here. I'm going to kind of pick an interesting moment. Now I kind of liked when this thing was sort of scaled out like that, but it might not produce the most interesting section, but let's go with it anyways. So I'll grab that, do a Control D, and move it out. And then we never did a Boolean difference on this one, so I'm just going to kind of delete that because we don't really need it anymore. And then I'm going to delete the maskings that are animated, so we'll get rid of all that. So again, it's just kind of a matter of cleaning up your file before you start the next technique. So I've got these two objects now. So I've got mesh 45 and mesh 46. Now the rest of this stuff can all be deleted. Again, I want to kind of clean up my outliner a little bit before starting the next round. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do an edit, delete all by type history. And that's going to kind of release any previous effects on these objects. And then the next thing I'm doing is I'm just going to come in here, select all those groups, and delete them. And get rid of all that stuff. So now I've got these two objects. Okay. Now before I take the section cuts, there's a couple modifications I want to make, or a couple edits to these two masking models. One, I'm just going to do a quick mesh triangulate. It's going to create a series of new edges, and it's going to kind of just make this mesh just a little bit cleaner by triangulating all of that stuff. And then I'm going to do an edit mesh merge. And again, it's just a matter of like trying to make sure you have clean geometry, and that sort of helps. You can also do a mesh cleanup. Sometimes that helps too. But again, it's, you just kind of run through those real quick just as sort of a double check. So again, with this one, I'm going to do mesh triangulate, go back in the object mode, edit mesh merge, just to make sure everything's kind of cleaned up, welded, etc. And we'll just kind of leave these the way they are. Okay, so let's create a section plane. I'm going to select the first object. Okay. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to cut the object in half using a mirror plane, and then delete half the object, and that's going to result in our section cut. So select this object. Now this technique is sort of an older command that newer versions of Maya have removed from these menus up here, but it still exists. You just have to type it into our script editor. So I'm going to open up the script editor. I'm going to type perform poly mirror cut space 1. It has to be typed exactly like this, along with the capital letters. So it's perform with a lowercase p, poly with a capital P, mirror with a capital M, and then C with a capital, or cut with a capital C, space 1. And then I'm going to hit play. And that's going to open up these mirror cut options. Okay. The first thing we're going to do is set our cutting plane. I want to kind of cut it so that it's cutting through the object this way, which if you look down at our axes is our YX plane. So I'm going to select YX. And then you want to make sure that merge with the original, this is unchecked. Okay. And then we're going to click mirror cut. And what that's going to happen is it's going to create this plane, and across that plane your geometry is going to be mirrored. And so what you're going to notice if you click and drag on this blue arrow, it's actually mirroring the object along that plane. Okay. What we're going to do is, if you notice, as I click and drag on that blue arrow, this part of the object is staying still. This part of the object is moving. Okay, so what we're going to do is select the moving part and delete it. Just get rid of it. And then when you pan around, you're going to notice that our object is being cut. Okay, and you can actually see the inside of it. Now, if you want to be able to see the inside of it a little better, you can go up to lighting up here and turn on two-sided lighting. And that's actually going to show the inside. Okay, it's just a little preview tool. So now this object's being cut. Now, I can have it cut from either side. Okay, I'm not locked into this direction. I can turn on my rotate tool and actually rotate this plane. And this is how we can animate sort of more complex section cuts. So you can come up to your channel box, and I just rotated it 180 degrees. So now it's just cutting from the other side. Right? Okay. So this mirror plane can be keyframed just like you would any other piece of geometry that's in our scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the mirror plane out here, and I'm going to animate it kind of cutting through. And I'm not going to go all the way because by the time you get to the end it gets a little boring. So I'll usually go to I'll go to about here because that's sort of an interesting section cut right there, right? Got like multiple volumes kind of coming together at once. So I've got that going on. So I might stop it here, and then maybe I'll rotate it and then kind of push it back out again. And then maybe we rotate it so that it's then a planar cut and it kind of pushes down through the object. Okay. And this is how we generate our animated sections. So let's set this thing back to our normal rotations. So I want this at 180, so it's cutting from this side. Pull it down. Okay, so I'm got it at this position. I always start it like fully outside the model, so nothing's being cut at the beginning of the animation. I'm also going to take this and kind of push it off to the side. So I'll start with it here. I'm going to have this happen over the course of, let's say, 10 seconds. So I'm going to just leave this at 300, from 1 to 300, my time slider, and we'll start animating from here. So I'll set my time first. I'm going to key this at its starting position. So I'll drag select on my channel box, do key selected. And then let's say for the first 100 frames, it'll do the first movement, which will be coming into about there. And I'll do a key selected. And then to frame 200, I'm going to rotate it and pull it out a little bit. Key selected. And then I'm going to go to frame 250. Rotate it more. Come up here. I'm going to set this to exactly 90 degrees so it's a flat planar cut. Then move it up a little bit to about there. Key selected. And then we'll go to 300 and pull it down to about there. Key selected. Okay, so we can now preview this animation. Hit play, and it should start to cut through. Now that's a little fast. It's kind of hard to understand like what's going on because that planar cut is moving so quickly. Also, if this green box doesn't move, don't worry about it. You can kind of, the minute you go back to editing it, it's gonna fix itself. So again, it's not something you really need to worry about. So what I'm gonna do, because that animation is moving a little too quick, I'm going to scale out this animation so that it occurs over the course of 20 seconds instead of 10 seconds. So I'm going to set this to 600 and this as well. I want to keep the movements. I think those are all fine. All I'm going to do is kind of come over here. I'm going to hold shift. I'm going to drag, select all those keys. And then I'm going to grab this arrow and just kind of stretch this out. Okay. And we can select this guy. Now our last tick didn't quite make it to 300, but that's okay. It's only a couple frames off. So now let's see how fast this thing kind of moves. It should be quite a bit slower. Yeah, that's much better. You actually have time to kind of look and see the different sectional qualities that are going to be created. So let's go with 20 seconds, or just make sure the section cut isn't moving quicker than this. All right, so that's section plane. Now let's take a look. Actually, let's make our camera first. So I'm going to go to create, camera, and aim. Just check to make sure this is orthographic. Pull that out. Again, we want to center our geometry. Again, I'm going to kind of do everything from that same point of view, just to keep everything kind of in tune. Set our aim, pull that over, and then go to our panels, orthographic, camera 1. Again, we're way too far zoomed in, so we'll go to our attribute editor, go down to orthographic views, we'll set this to 100, looks pretty good. Grab our aim, turn on our film gate, and just make sure that we're doing our best to kind of center this object. Okay, let's maximize this view and hit the play button. Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's see what this thing looks like when we render it. So you can see like what a section cut renders like. Again, this still has that ambient occlusion material applied to it. We'll kind of preview it at that point. That'll be a good one to look at. So let's render that out. All right, there we go. So when you take a section cut of an object like this, what you're going to get is sort of like a hollowed out inside. Okay, now this doesn't have any thickness to it, right? This border here. The very last thing I'm going to show you is how to give thickness to an object so it actually looks like it has like a wall or something like that, where it's not just sort of a shell. But this is one option for producing a section cut, okay? And this looks fine, like I've got no problem with the way this looks, but there are two other options. We can either infill all of this with poche, so it actually looks like you're cutting through a solid piece of material, or we can give thickness to it and then cut it, and it'll look like you're cutting through an actual wall. So we'll get into those next. So I'm going to go back to my perspective view, and for this one I'm going to duplicate this just so I have a third one to deal with. So for this, what we're going to do is cut through this and give it a custom material. So I'm going to select it, go into my script editor, type perform poly mirror cut 1, hit play, close this, create our mirror cut, pull it out, delete the side that's moving. Now I've got my section cut. Okay. Again, I'm going to rotate this 180 just so it's cutting from the other side. So now if I cut this, right, I'm going to get that same effect. That's sort of like I'm cutting through sort of a shell. Okay. So if you don't want that and you want it to look as though this isn't hollow but it has like a poche or thickness to it, what you can do is create what's called a custom material. So we're going to hop into that. Basically, all it's going to be is an occlusion material applied to the outside, your standard, that black and white kind of shaded color. And then on the inside, we're going to apply a jet black material, and it'll give the illusion that you're cutting through a solid object. Okay, so let's apply this custom material. In order to create or edit materials, you have to open up what's called your hypershade. So you go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. And that's going to open up a new window. Okay. In this contains all of the materials that we've applied to various objects in our scene. So right now we have two ambient occlusions. We've got our default Lambert 1. This is always in here. We have a Lambert 2. Created this at some point in time. And then we've got these standard shaders and particles. Those occur in every Maya scene. Just leave them there. You don't need to touch those. This is where we start to create and edit materials. These are your list of different kind of materials. There's a ton of stuff here. We're not going to get into most of it. It's just a couple things we're going to grab in order to produce this kind of custom material. And then over here is a preview of material, so you can select one of these and it's going to pop open a preview. And then down here are the attributes or settings for each material that you have popped open. Okay, so let's create a custom material. Now, there's quite a few different pieces that have to be created to produce this material. I actually have a screenshot of all the parts, and this is what creating a material kind of looks like in Maya. You string together different settings. I know this looks really complicated, but we're going to go through this step by step, and it's going to be the only time you really need to do this. So we'll kind of just run through it. But basically what happens is you have a ambient occlusion on the outside of your material. You have a Lambert that's black on the inside of the material, or the inside of your geometry. And that creates that sort of poche effect. And then these guys over here are what bring everything together, or bring the two materials together and tell Maya how to properly render it. So let's start bringing some materials or some items down to our canvas. The first thing I'm going to grab is the ambient occlusion, the Lambert, and this sampler info node. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. I'm going to grab under Arnold. I'm going to grab ambient occlusion. So I'm just going to click it, and it's going to come down. And I'm going to delete this little blue box over here, so we don't need that. And then I'm going to come under Maya surface and grab a Lambert. Again, I'm going to delete that little blue box. You can zoom out using your middle scroll button. The controls in here are the same, other than you can't rotate. It's just pan and zoom. Hold Alt, your middle mouse button for pan. And then under Maya, I'm going to come up here. I'm going to select Maya. I'm going to come up here and type sampler info, and it's going to bring this sampler info up. So I'm going to click that. Okay, so I've got those three nodes down. The next in this screenshot is this condition node. So I'm going to come up here and type condition, start to. I'm going to grab this condition node. Don't grab color condition, just don't grab float, just normal condition. Okay, and then you can look to see how things are strung together, right? I've got ambient occlusion going into color if true. I've got Lambert 3 going into color if false. I've got the sampler info node coming out of flip normal and going into first term. Okay, so all we're going to do is kind of zoom in a little bit, click and drag with your left mouse button. It's going to create this string. We're going to plop it into the input value on this side. So just to kind of double check, AI ambient occlusion is going into color if true. So I'm going to click and drag color if true, and it should snap it right there. Okay, and then our Lambert is going to go into color if false. You're going to kind of feel it like latch in, and that's when you want to just release. All right, and then our sampler info node, you'll notice that it's flip normal, but it's coming out of the right side of the node. That's important, but right now there is nothing to click and drag out of the right side. So what you do is you click this little 3-bar tab up here once, twice, 3 times, and you'll notice it switched all of the little outputs from the left hand side to the right hand side. So again, it's just click, 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 and then we've got our flipped normal. We'll drag out of that and latch it into first term and release, and that should lock into there. Okay, so those are all strung together. Then what we'll do is grab our surface shader 1. So I'm going to come up here and type surface shader, and we want to grab this black surface shader, and that's going to bring with it this little blue piece at the end. So that'll complete the number of nodes that we need. Okay, now this surface shader 1, that's the material we're going to be applying to our geometry. Okay, And so what we've got, if you go back to the screenshot, you've got out color of the condition node going into out color of the surface shader. So it's just as simple as clicking and dragging from there to there. Okay. So then up at the top, you'll see this surface shader. What you can do is you can select that, and then down in the little attributes here, just call this Poche material and hit enter. That way it changes the name and you know exactly what it is. The next thing we're going to do is come into and select this little Lambert node. We're going to switch the color to black. Okay. And that's it. That's all that it takes to kind of produce that material. So we're going to close out of this. We're then going to select our object. Okay. Hold down right click. Assign existing material because we just we just created it. And I'm going to select Poche material. And it's going to turn that object black, make it kind of difficult to see. That's okay. It's supposed to look like that. So then I'll hit the render button. And instead of having that kind of hollow look to it, it's actually going to produce like a solid Poche effect around where it's cutting. Okay, so that's a slightly different effect. Now it kind of feels like you're cutting through a solid object. Okay, which is a little bit different. It's a different way to kind of read the section quality of this piece. You're not actually seeing inside any of the volumes. You're just kind of cutting through it. So it's just a different way of creating a section cut. And then the third thing that we're going to look at is how to cut through an object with thickness to it. So I've kind of duplicated this object, and right now it has no thickness. Okay, or well, it has thickness, but it has no interior like wall quality, right? Meaning if I select a face and I delete that face, there's no thickness in here. Okay, which is why you get section cuts that look like this, right? There's no thickness to this wall. Well, it is possible to give objects thickness in Maya. It's a little difficult, and it gets to be a little, it can make your geometry kind of messy, but we can give it a shot just so you guys can see how to do that. So I'm going to select the object, go to Edit Mesh, Extrude, and I'm just going to click that. You're going to get this little gumball that pops up, and what you want to do is click and drag on the blue arrow, and it's going to extrude that object outwards or inwards. Okay, and like I said, it's going to look kind of messy depending on how complex your geometry is. This is always a difficult task to do no matter what program you're in. When you get really complicated geometry, it becomes very difficult to give it thickness. So what you're seeing are like self-intersecting faces where you're starting to see that orange pop up. You want to kind of avoid that as much as possible. So you can kind of just like click and drag and see what's going on. It's like adding thickness on the outside, and then this would be adding thickness to the inside. I'm going to go to the outside just because it's probably going to be the kind of cleanest way to do it. The other thing you can test right now, you'll notice that while I'm clicking and dragging this little locate translate Z value is changing. If I set that down to 0, that's no thickness at all. But you can also change just the general thickness value, so I might try and do this instead. So I'll set it to 0.1, and that's going to grow it a little bit. And that actually looks at least a little bit cleaner than what I was working with before. So I'm just going to leave it there. Go back into my object mode. Now let's see what happens when I cut through this. And you can see there's still like some messy parts, like that kind of came out looking a little weird. right there. But let's run a mirror cut so we can see what the difference is. So let's do our perform poly mirror cut 1, hit play, close that, select our object, click apply, delete the moving side. Let's flip this around so it's 180, coming from the other way. Close that. Now you'll see that as I cut through this, I have just a little bit of wall thickness here. Okay. And then what we can do is apply that double-sided material, that custom material we made, to this object, and it's going to actually look like we're cutting through a wall. So I'm going to select this, hold down right click, assign existing material, crochet material, and now I'm going to render this out. And you should get sort of like a wall effect, as if you're cutting through the wall. Yep. See how I get that nice clean black bar right there? So it actually looks like I'm cutting through a thickened wall of material. So it's just sort of a slightly different looking effect. You'll notice up here things are starting to get kind of messy. It's a little confusing as to what's going on, and that's because we have some self-intersecting faces. So if I switch this back to a Lambert, just so I can see it a little better, and let's pull this section out some so it's not in the way. Now again, that's kind of where this material is sort of popping up and looking kind of weird. You can spend some time going in and trying to clean it. I don't typically worry about it. Honestly, people don't really notice it all that much. You'd have to like grab some faces and move some vertices. A lot of it is coming down to this little moment here where we've got two volumes sharing a single edge. That's kind of, shouldn't have modeled it that way in the first place. But you know, those kinds of things happen, and again, it's just, you know, you can spend some time trying to clean it up. I'm not really going to get into it because it's sort of the only place that's happening. But if your model is like going really crazy when you give it thickness like that, then I just say don't worry about it. But if it's clean and it's well modeled and you can kind of produce that section wall effect where you actually are cutting through something that has some thickness to it, go ahead and do it. It looks pretty good. Okay, so once you have those three sections kind of created, start rendering away using the rendering script. Set your camera to where you want it to be. Remember, make sure that your section plane is moving, you know, kind of nice and slow. Again, doing one over the course of 20 seconds instead of 10 seconds helps with that. Don't let it, you know, zip around and fly around too fast. Just kind of keep it sort of slow and steady. And then if you like the way that that double-sided material looks, because it gives you that sort of poché effect when you're cutting through something, go ahead and make that as well and use that in your renderings. All right.